The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
जी जी ठीक है
नहीं वैसे आवाज से नहीं
जी
है
चलो
फिर आगे जाना था तो कॉल पे चले जाए स्पीकर आ गया
और स्पीकर भी ऑनलाइन
ऑनलाइन स्पीकर भी ऑन
and good afternoon Hester. uh, it's my pleasure
Hello, good afternoon, good morning. Good morning for me.
thank you. We are hearing. Can you hear us? Hello Hester.
Yeah, it's here.
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
Yeah. This is Dr. Bashir Ahmed from Pakistan Agriculture Research Council, and it's my pleasure to coordinate this talk. This is basically a series of talk being coordinated and held by Lead Pakistan. So its overall theme is managing shared basins, and within that theme there are a number of talks, and mostly we are covering today mountain water, crucial for downstream food production in South Asia. And this talk is many people are joining online as well. So regarding this series of talks, so this is being recorded, audio recorded, and the previous talks were also recorded, and those talks our recordings are available on Lead Pakistan website. So if someone is interested, so he or she can make available and have some thoughts over there, as well as some short brief of these talks is also online available. So regarding future talks, so the schedule is available online, and if someone of the audience is interested in future talks, so he can see and participates in future talks as well. With that, let me introduce today's speaker. So today's speaker is Dr. Hester Bimas. So Dr. Hester is a senior researcher, and she is working on climate change, water and food security, and she belongs from Wageningen University of the Netherlands. So she holds a PhD degree in Earth System Sciences, and her PhD title was Water Constraints on Future Food Production. Since 2009, she has been actively researching climate change impacts and potentials for adaptation in South Asia in several research projects and collaborations. And since 2014, she is a co-principal investigator of the Himalayan Adaptation Water and Resilience Highway project, funded by different IDRC. In a person, she is actively working on water supply and demand modeling, and she has quite a few good presentations. And let me invite Dr. Hester to make a presentation on mountain water crucial for downstream food production in South Asia. So after the talk from the participants, you can ask a question. So Hester, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. Just to confirm, can you hear me now? I was not sure that you could hear me before.
We can hear you, and its voice quality is very fine.
Good, that's good to know. Okay, well, good afternoon to you, good morning to me. It's early morning in the Netherlands. I'm calling in from overseas. So first of all, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk about the project I'm involved in and the work I'm doing in that. I appreciate it very much. I have given the same, or partly the same, but mostly the same talk a few months ago in Islamabad during the CCAPS conference. So actually, I hope you have not been there, because then you have seen part of the presentation already. But on the other hand, I understood that after this presentation there's plenty of room for questions and time. So so let's see. Okay, so the title of my talk is Mountain Water is Crucial for Downstream Food Production in South Asia. This is a talk about the modeling work conducted under HiWare, in which we try to link the upstream water supply with downstream demands in the most detailed way possible. It's not only a scientific exercise, but we really try to, by improving our understanding of the water supply and demand, and the sources of demand versus the sources of supply, that we can, if we better understand the system, also have better, efficient, targeted adaptation, design of adaptation measures. But that will come later. So first of all, I want to emphasize that the work I'm presenting here is not done by myself only. It's not done by the whole group you see here, but this is a really nice picture of the people that are involved in HiWare during one of our very inspiring working weeks that we had at Isimot in Kathmandu. And many people are involved in the research. Other thing I want to say is that the thing I am presenting here is really only a very small part of all the things we do in HiWare, and it's really focusing on the biophysical modeling, but a lot more is going on in the project. And if you're interested, please check the website, ask Dr. Bashir, and since Lead is a partner as well, maybe some of you, I'm not sure who exactly is in the audience today, but some of you might also be involved themselves. So I'll start with the key messages. So after that you can start sleeping and wake up by the end of the talk. No, that's a joke. But to already make clear what I want to talk about, or what I want to explain today, is that the water resources for the mountains are crucial for downstream food production in at least parts of South Asia. And that implies actually that if there's in the future a change of meltwater availability, that can be the amount, but also very much the timing, that can have an impact on this food production. And I also hope to explain to you that by using a detailed water resources model, which is of course not perfect, but it does help you to understand the risks, and it can also help you to manage the water budget, and therefore it can be a useful tool in policy support and decision making. So this is more of a sort of conceptual scheme of how I see my work and how I place it. So in the top left side you see the global context. So global change is climate change, big socio-economic changes, that is global. But adaptation, on the other hand, where you calculate costs versus benefits, where you, the scale where adaptation measures are taken is very, very local. But the basin scale is the relevant scale for planning, and also makes it the relevant scale to combine both contexts. You cannot ignore the global context, what's going on in climate change and the big socio-economic changes like population. On the other hand, you can also not ignore local circumstances and local context. So basin scale is relevant scale to combine those both contexts, but we do need models to make the link. Also, for example, to assess measures that work at a certain location, and it does not imply that it works at all locations. So what I try to do is combine the knowledge from global assessments, from global climate models, from socioeconomic scenarios, and downscale those to the region, but also use knowledge from field experiments, workshops on potential adaptation measures, for example, and the knowledge on what would work and what would not work. And the challenge there for me, or for us, is to develop a tool that helps us to understand complex processes that lead to current and future water and food insecurity in certain regions, including the effect of climate change and socioeconomic change. What is relevant for policy support is adaptation. So the model system should also be feasible to be used for evaluation of a range of adaptation options that might be or are proven to be promising on the ground, and that have potential for up and out scaling. At the same time, a model that should be useful for policy uptake should be understandable and robust and trustworthy, so it needs some scientific quality and some scientific quality to make sure that it is giving at least right directions. So I will start with the global context, and I show here a result of a very recent project that we did with a lot of institutes together in the Netherlands. It's for a selection of ministries. It's called Interdepartmental Water Clusters. We did projects on water hotspots, and this is some result of the hotspot. It shows, I think I zoomed it in here. It shows some projected change in rain-fed crop yields for the 2050s, and it shows irrigation water shortage projections. And as you can see, South Asia is a hotspot for both water and food. Of course, we know that. It's not only known from the scientific community. From these newspaper headlines, you can see that it's also perceived in the region. So there is newspaper headlines on heat, changes in monsoon, crop losses. There's even an advertisement for an air conditioning that's powerful at 52 degrees, which is really warm. So it's not only the science alarming, it's also newspaper headlines so happening in real time. So that is one of the reasons that IDRC and DFID launched a call on climate adaptation research in Africa and Asia. And one of the projects that got funded under this program is HIWARE, which is the Himalayan Adaptation, Water and Resilience research on glacier and snowpack dependent river basins for improving livelihoods. That's actually a mouthful, and I believe I forgot the HKH even in the title, but I'm unsure. So it's funded by DFID and IDRC. That's the UK Canadian based development organizations. The program is funded it's called CARIA, Climate Adaptation Research in Africa and Asia, that funds 4 projects, but only this one on specifically on the glacier and snowpack dependent rivers. It's running from 2014 to 2018. Actually, we are really busy in wrapping up and making the project synthesis. And within this project, we have 5 consortium partners and many subcontractors. One of the consortium partners is Wageningen University and Research, where I work, and one of the other consortium partners is PARC, where Dr. Bashir works, and LEAD is one of the subcontractors of PARC. The total budget of the project is 10 million euros over 5 years. So HiWare's main research question is how to develop timely adaptation measures and approaches to respond to rising temperatures, seasonal shifts in glacier and snowmelt-induced runoff, and increased frequency of extreme events in the HKH mountains and the floodplains, and with the goal to improve resilience of livelihoods of the poor and vulnerable women, men, and children in the region. But it is a research project. Although there's, compared to most research projects I was involved in before, it has a strong focus on research into use, but the science needs to be relevant for policy and practice. So there is very much attention to asking relevant questions and developing the relevant indicators. So I'm only going to tell you one story that was part of the HiWare research that I was involved in, but many more things are going on and many more stories to tell, as I told you before. But please have a look at the website or ask Dr. Bashir, because we have many interesting research results, and not only this. But the rationale behind this question, or the is that we have seen a lot of papers or in the newspaper and in the scientific literature that call the volumes of water stored in the HKH as snow and ice the water towers of Asia, and also those claims that there are very many people downstream dependent on that water. But we were asking ourselves whether that was true and whether we could quantify it. So how important are those water towers, so the snow and glaciers, how important are they actually for the downstream water users, and then in particular for the downstream agriculture? And is there a difference in the timing? Because of course you have also the monsoon rains that come in summer. So when exactly is that meltwater important? And for which crops, can we also say that, and where, on which locations in the basins? And then, of course, the next question is what happens then if the glaciers retreat further, or the timing of the meltwater runoff shifts, and how can agriculture adapt to this? So you really need to find out how is the interaction between the glacier melt and the timing of the glacier melt and the timing of the water demand for different crops. So this picture just it shows a little bit in general what are the links between the upstream parts of rivers and the downstream part of rivers. So in the upstream, you see there's the source of water, and there is most of the rain and snow fall in the mountains. There's lakes that store the water, there are glaciers, and the water comes downstream where water is used, because most of the population lives downstream. The irrigation is taking place there. So it's really a matter of source and supply, and the downstream users depend on the upstream water supply. But as you are all aware, the water resources situation in South Asia is quite difficult, and there are many challenges to understand this situation. It is a monsoon-dominated climate, so the variability in precipitation is really high. There are super high mountains in the north, um, the high altitude precipitation is not always very well understood, and then there is the snow and glacier melt. Downstream, there are dams and reservoirs for water storage and supply, so they also have to be taken into account. There are irrigation systems with canals that transport and supply water over large distances. The agriculture, because it's so dry downstream, is very much depending on irrigation. Not only surface water, but also groundwater is used for irrigation and other users. And in some places, this leads to there's an overdraft leading to groundwater depletion. At the demand side, it's also complex because the water demand pattern is quite complex through because there's very intensive agriculture with multiple cropping. We have if looking into the future, there's a strong population growth, also GDP growth, and there's a strong climate change projected even at 1.5 degree. So this all has to be taken in account if you want to have a complete understanding of water resources in the region. And this is then only the biophysical perspective. Of course, transboundary characteristics of the basin and governance structure makes it even complexer to understand and also to design appropriate measures. So we did develop a model that accounts for all these processes, the biophysical processes then. And for those who are interested, I'm very much willing to explain further details of the model, but for this presentation, I'll leave it here and by saying that we took this all into account in the model system. Oh, now I get, let's see what happens. Okay, yeah. So the first thing we did, and that was explicitly not done by me, but colleagues in the project, we made or developed a new climate data set for current climate. So we used new techniques to improve the estimates of the high altitude precipitation, which is often underestimated due to a lack of stations at high altitude, whereas most precipitation falls in the mountains. As you can see here, there's a strong gradient from east to west in terms of precipitation totals, but also from north to south, so from the mountains to the plains. The lower Indus sees really little rain, which already suggests that it's much more, or it could be much more depending on the water from upstream than maybe the Ganges and Brahmaputra rivers. So for the upstream part of the rivers, we developed a mountain hydrology model, and this explicitly calculates the contribution of glacier and snowmelt to the downstream supply. These, I hope you, yeah, I think you can see my mouse. These are the outlets of the mountain subbasins, and you can already see that this is the contribution of glacier melt, contribution of snow melt, contribution of rainfall runoff, and you can already see that in the tributaries going to or that are part of the Indus Basin, the melt contribution is the highest. So this is a model that explicitly models glacier extent and is designed to do the mountain hydrology. That's published by Arthur Lutz et al., who's also part or a partner in the project. So for the downstream part, we use a water and food model that simulates both water flows, but also crop production and the links between water shortage and production. In this figure, you see the routing only. So there's no, we did not simulate withdrawals yet. So it shows mean annual values of meltwater contribution to downstream river discharge. So starting from the subbasins, from the subbasins that are similar translated by the mountain hydrology model. That's this domain, and then it goes into the downstream river ending in the ocean here. And here you can also see that the meltwater contribution in Indus is much higher. It starts up here with 80 to 90% meltwater contribution, and but at the outlet is still 60 to 70%, which is much lower in the Ganges and Brahmaputra basins. But this shows mean annual value, so it might be variable throughout the year, or actually it's very likely that it's variable throughout the year. So what you see here is this at those 3 points very close to the outlet for the 3 basins, you can see the contribution of meltwater, which is the light blue component in the total flow, and then during the year. And in the bottom part you can see the fraction of discharge that actually is meltwater or upstream water. That's all the water coming from the mountains, which is the light blue and the dark blue. But let's focus on the light blue. So the Indus has the highest contribution of melt and upstream water because it has a weaker monsoon than the other basins, and it has a very arid area downstream. But you can also see that the meltwater is mostly important in spring, monsoon water in summer, and there are very low flows from November, March till May. So then probably groundwater is the most important source. This is the same figure actually as the previous one, but it shows the a little bit more how water is distributed to irrigated cropland. So it shows large reservoirs in the region. All the dots are reservoirs, the green and red dots. The green ones are built for irrigation, and the size of the dot represents the size of the reservoir. And the other thing that is shown in green, you see the main irrigated areas. In light green, the light green shades, and the dotted areas are the big command areas of large irrigation canal systems. So that's also included in the model. So the distribution here through these canal systems is included in the model. So what you see here is the mean annual contribution of meltwater to irrigation supply. So by this distribution of water, it takes into account where the irrigation takes place, and also which crops need water at what time. But it shows that some regions in the Indus are super dependent on water that originates from snow and glacier melt. So in some regions here it's over 60% here, but still in this area it's really high because it's so there's so little precipitation that all the water is diverted from the river here. Ganges and Brahmaputra see very little or less dependency on meltwater, except for the region here in the northwest, where it's still significant. From the previous slides, you can see that the water availability is very variable in time and space. But because water shortage is also a mismatch, matter of mismatches in time and place between water supply and water demand, a good representation of timing is also important. And actually in the scientific literature or in research, there's very little attention to that. So to understand when and where meltwater is used, you also need a very clear understanding of the timing of water demand. So water demand depends on the locations of crops and how much precipitation is already. So the water demand for irrigation, I mean, so it depends on the location of crops, how much precipitation is there already, what is the growing season of the crop, so the sowing date and the length of the growing season. And that's taken into account here. It shows for Indus the timing of irrigation demand throughout the year, and also the crops that make that irrigation demand. So you can see Here, largest demands are for rice and cotton, wheat and sugarcane, but with very different timings. Sugarcane grows all year round, rice grows mainly during the Kharif season, cotton also during Kharif, but it's sown earlier, from what I understood from the literature and the agricultural statistics, and wheat grows mainly during the Rabi season, which is the winter season. So if you combine water availability and demand, which is then a combination of the cropping calendar with this shows a combination of water availability and demand. It's a combination of a cropping calendar with the relative dependency on meltwater. That's the color scale. So this is for the Indus. So you can see in what stage of the crop the meltwater is important. So for example, here is the arrows show the which crop it represents. So for example, this is the season of cotton, and this is then also the season of cotton. And here it shows in the color scale, shows the relative dependency on meltwater. So you can see that meltwater is especially important in the hot period just before the monsoon. So that actually confirms that notion, and we can simulate that with the model. I realized that I put a lot of effort in understanding how the current situation is, but I really think we cannot talk about the future and develop efficient and timely adaptation measures if you do not understand the current situation. That's why we have spent a lot of time and effort in improving our data and models for the current period. So okay, I was not. This shows the. Okay, yeah. Sorry, I did not realize I included this slide, but it shows the contribution of different sources for the irrigation water demand that is shown in this figure. So it's actually the same figure, but then with the sources of supply. And here also you can see, of course, that upstream melt is a is an important contributor to irrigation supply in the Indus River. And here it shows that so it shows per crop what is the contribution of the different water sources. You can see rice and cotton are the main absolute so rice and cotton are the largest water users, and also they use the largest absolute and relative volumes of snow and glacier melt. Yeah, so now we go to the future. Sorry, I was a little bit confused. So unless we understand the current situation, we cannot go to the future. So that is something we're also working on. We developed, our colleagues of mine developed a representative set of climate change scenarios for the region that cover the uncertainty as in the latest IPCC, but also are tested on their capability of simulating important patterns like monsoon onset. That's really important for this region. So we used 8 high-resolution climate change scenarios, or 8 GCMs. That is representative of the entire CMIP5 and cover a wide range of possible future. We did an empirical statistical downscaling by quantile mapping methodology, but that preserved the changes in extremes. What you can see in this figure is that there is an increase in precipitation in most regions, but less in the northwest of the Indus. This work is done by colleagues of mine at Future Water. It's Arthur Lutz and colleagues who are also involved in this project. So we also then forced the hydrological models or the upstream models with these new scenarios. And what you can see here is that the in the left figures, it shows the peak of snow and glacier melt, or the daily mean snow and glacier melt for the Indus and Ganges, upper and lower figure. What you can see is that in both rivers, the timing of snow and glacier melt is going to to earlier. Sorry. So that's already happening in RCP 4.5, but even more in RCP 8.5. And here you can see it's the glacier melt peak is shifting about a month earlier. What's also very clear is that because of the increase in precipitation, and maybe, by the way, maybe not only because that would also affect, that would only affect snow melt, but you do see an increase in snow and glacier melt in both simulations, more so in 4.5 than 8.5, but for the Indus it's very clearly an increase in snow and glacier melt. For the Ganges, we actually see a shift in snow and glacier melt peak, but also very much a decrease, especially in 8.5. This shows the daily mean precipitation patterns in the different climate models, and the ensemble mean is the thick line actually, but there you do not really see a shift. At least it's there. Looks like there's more uncertainty also between the models, so it's less pronounced there. But there's not clearly a shift in monsoon onset visible. Apart from in the Ganges, it looks like it's going a little bit. The peak is a little bit later in the season than that's currently the case. Then I have just some examples of things that we do with a model or other indicators, and also I want to illustrate that we try to relate to the perspective of the policymakers, and it's always good to see how people react on certain types of indicators, or way you try to emphasize or raise awareness on some things that we see in the models. And the visualization and the choice of indicators is super important here. We noticed, for example, that this figure raised some awareness, and while some other figures that I'm enthusiastic about are not even taken up. So it's an iterative process to test what is the best way to show results. So in this case, what we show here is it's a model result. It's nothing final yet, so don't take this as a final result. But it shows instead of showing what is the change in yield in 2050, like I showed before in the very first picture, for example, we show the change as a time range. So when will wheat yields be reduced with 20% compared to the period in the average of 1981 to 2010, because of a changing climate and especially the warming up, which is important for wheat. So it shows that over the entire region here where wheat is growing, very clearly that this region, because of the strongest warming, will hit or will have the strongest decrease in wheat yields, and therefore also be the first to have a 20% lower yield than compared to today. I have to say that this is a result based on current, so without any adaptation, without any change in management. So it's not maybe realistic, because there will be changes in seeds and changes in varieties maybe, but this is the crop model result shown in a different way. This is also showing that the model can be used for a range of questions, and that things also need to be combined. So if, for example, a region is very dependent on meltwater, and there will be a shift in meltwater, it cannot always be replaced by groundwater extractions. Here it shows the regions where we simulate the groundwater depletion, the annual groundwater depletion in millimeters, and that very much agrees with observations, for example, by Grace, or simulations by other, or studies done by other scientists. Apart from awareness raising, of course, next question is always what to do about it. So this is really ongoing work. This figure shows work from Jonas Jägermeier and his colleagues. At the global scale, he shows what are the water saving potentials of changes in irrigation systems. It changes the water productivity, and it changes non-beneficial consumption, which means actually water consumed but not used for transpiration, and therefore not for actually crop growth. I've zoomed into the region, but this is a global analysis. So what we're working on is to assess the effect of measures that are mentioned by our colleagues and in the field, and also tested in pilots, and we try to upscale that, so that we try to assess the effect of measures like changes in irrigation system, different forms of management on rainfed cropland, changing in sowing date, change of crops or crop variety, other changes in land use. We can estimate the large-scale effects of increased water storage, local or large-scale storage, and then how that affects different impact indicators, which can be groundwater depletion, discharge downstream, crop production, frequency of crop failure, to what extent it closes the water yield gap or the water gap, or the volume of water shortage, or the dependency on water from upstream. So this is ongoing work. In this figure, you see the effect of different water management options in the Indus. It shows on the positive y-axis the total production, which actually doesn't change in this case, and the total water withdrawal when we apply different types of water management. Largest effects you see when you go from surface to sprinkler to drip. You see a drastic decrease in total irrigation water withdrawal. We have not really looked yet at the other indicators, for example, the effect downstream of upstream changes to drip, or these kind of things. But this is a start. So if you look at the applications and the link to policy, we are able to assess the combined effects of climate change and socioeconomic change on water resources and food production. We try to make tools that are more useful for decision support by active engagement, talking about scenarios, talking about indicators. So it's really try to do co-creation of scenarios and the selection of good indicators. We are working on the evaluation of adaptation measures at basin scale. So this is really very much a tool that can be used to do basin scale analysis, but with a strong link to the field work. And by having this consortium, I think we are able to do that. We are also working on the spatial explicit evaluation of the costs. We know what it costs if you go to drip, for example, or what are the land use costs, but also versus the benefits of a selection of adaptation measures, just to be spatially explicit and try to understand better what measures would have most effect in what locations. So to conclude, The water resources from the mountains are crucial for downstream agriculture, but in particular for Indus Basin. Rice and cotton, because of their growing season, are the most dependent on the meltwater, and you can see the spatial differentiation as well. So that means that a change in future availability of meltwater, and we just saw that it will shift in time. It will have an impact on production, and we are yet to find out how exactly that interaction works, but we do believe that an increased insight in the links between the sources of water demand and the sources of supply is very important to develop appropriate adaptation measures. and a water resources model like the one we developed very much helps to understand the risks, also the sources of the risks, and also hopefully to manage the water budget. And it can be a useful tool in policy support, but only if used in iterative process and at basin scale. For basin scale planning, always in-depth studies are needed, of course, because it's still very much a simplification of what's really happening. This is again the picture of the working week to illustrate that we do the science together, and it works on mutual inspiration. I'm very proud of being part of this project and this group of people. And I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to give this presentation. I hope it was clear. I hope it was you liked it. And if you have some additional questions, let's discuss that now. Also hope that we will be able to turn to video now, so I can see the audience and the audience can see me. That's might be nice for the discussion, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Esther. Thank you very much for a very nice, comprehensive, and elaborative presentation. And I think, yeah, it's a right time for the question. There's a very good mix of professional, very young, as well as very senior level professionals, as well as
very old.
Senior level. I respect senior level in terms of working in this profession, as well as there's a good mix of gender balance, and people might have a lot of questions, and I would request from the people who are physically present here, as well as there might be questions from the people who are joining online. So I would request if someone has a question to first introduce himself or herself, and then we can move on to questions. So,
Dr. Beemans, can you hear me?
Dr. Beemans, can you hear one of the question? Hi, Hester. Hester, can you hear us?
Bashir,
There's some precipitation going on.
Yeah, we cannot hear you. Hester, can you hear us now?
yeah, now I can hear you. Now it started again, but when you turned on the video, that was really a pity. But it got totally. I couldn't hear it anymore. It was the connection is too bad for that, I think.
I'm happy the connection is restored again, and there's one question.
And can you see me? Can you see me?
Yeah, we can see you.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So I cannot see you, but you can see me. That's okay.
No problem. Sir,
I have a few comments. First of all, thank you for a very interesting presentation. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Can you tell me also who you are? Because I cannot see you. That's just nice to know.
I'm a lapsed scientist. I don't have a lab to work in, but I used to work in a laboratory. Now I'm more into administrative activities. Um, my name is Shaukat Hamid Khan. I'm head of ComSpec, which is the OIC Committee for Science and Technology. Some quick comments. You talked about glacial belt, but there's also a thing called the Karakoram anomaly. I'd like your comments on that. Secondly, you talked about groundwater depletion, and it's and the map that you showed was more on the Indian side, the depletion, than on the Pakistani side. It's a disaster waiting to happen on the Pakistani side. And isotopic hydrology studies carried out by the Atomic Energy Commission have confirmed a major disaster looming for us in the near future. Because groundwater is a very major share of our total water budget. Um, I'd just like to bring you back to the Indus Basin Treaty, and that is maybe explains part of the problem. When the Indus Basin Treaty was designed, it was designed for 75% cropping intensity. Crossed 160% last year. So that's the amount of strain we are imposing on our water resources. That's one example, nearly double. Simply if nothing else happened, this is the cropping intensity requirements. Also, nature and scientists tend to be very adaptable and people. And you forget about the possibilities of research and new wheat varieties, for example, and others where they are stressed, coming up requiring lesser water. And so this is already happening in Pakistan. And now 25% of the wheat varieties now are produced from a research institute in Sindh, which are drought resistant. So that's a good sign. And lastly, we talked about water use, the A, B, C, the graphs you showed at the end, used for irrigation. Something interesting has happened in the last few years. Laser land levelers have come out in Pakistan, and something to do with the lab where I worked, and they reduced the water requirement by 31 to 37% on the average, depending on what the kind of soil it is. Also, without changing anything, the yield output has gone up by 16 to 18% because of uniform distribution of water and fertilizer. Just I thought I'd share this.
thank you, sir. Hester, there was a.
Sorry, one other thing. We are planning a major event or conference, technical conference later this year on glaciology and trying to understand have some sensors on the ground, uh, monitoring from space, and using isotope hydrology to tell old water from fresh rainwater. So one can monitor all this flow down the Indus.
Yeah, Hester, could you hear the comment properly?
Yeah, I heard some. It's difficult for me to understand. I think you are closer to the mic, so I can hear you better.
Yeah, let me. Mr. Mr. Shaukat, he appreciated your presentation and work, and there was one question regarding crack anomaly, but he commented on adaptation, what is already happening in Indus Basin. Like he mentioned that low delta drought-resistant wheat varieties, mostly from downstream Sindh, such institution, as well as he pointed out this laser land labeling and water saving in water application, about 20. And
what the numbers were when it was designed.
cropping intensity. And in the Indus Basin Treaty, the cropping intensity was about 75%, but now the crop intensity has reached more than double.
Yeah.
Basically, it was
Yeah, yeah.
not an Indus Basin Treaty when the Indus irrigation system by design. So it was designed on 70% cropping intensity, but now due to
Division of the rivers between Pakistan and India.
yeah, now the cropping intensity has already more than a double. In few areas, it's 4 times than this 70%. So, would you comment on a crop anomaly?
Um, Actually, I'm not sure
Although
that
you
I
are not a
can
right
really
person.
comment on it because I'm not the right person. You know, the thing is, I know that glacier mass balances are taken into account to do precipitation corrections for the for the climate reference climate data set. So I do assume that the fact that glaciers are that's the Karakoram anomaly, right? That the glaciers are actually measured to be increasing instead of decreasing, right?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And that might have to do with irrigation-induced increase in precipitation, which is not always captured by the models that I also read recently. But I have not. I mean, I know some of the details or some in a broad sense the methodology they use to develop the climate data set, but I have not been involved in it myself. I do know that they used glacier mass balances to correct precipitation, so I assume that is done for Karakoram as well. But I can only check that question with the people in the project who were really involved in this work. I'm for the climate data set, I'm only using their product, and also for the upstream hydrology, I'm also using the data that they produced, and I'm myself working on the water demand and supply modeling in the downstream domain.
Yeah, thank you. That's why I said you are not the right person for this question. Yeah, we can move forward, and there's another question.
I am Azhar Qureshi, one of the fellows from Lead Pakistan. Amongst 2,200 fellows globally, we are working in the world. My concern related to this presentation is that keeping in view the ongoing level of glacial
Law.
melt and the changing patterns of rainfall, the scenario of drought overall in Pakistan is very much imminent. My concern is that would the available adaptation measures would be sufficient to make a difference, while at a time when the policies are not being implemented and actions are not being taken on the ground. So, would you like to comment on this?
Yeah, Bashir, can you repeat it? I was just disconnected for a short period.
Okay, my question is that keeping in view the ongoing level of glacial melt and the changing patterns of rainfall, the overall scenario of drought is imminent on Pakistan. Would the current available adaptation measures would be sufficient to face this situation at a time when policies are not being implemented and actions are not being taken on the ground?
To answer that honestly, I'm not sure yet, because I think that in the very first step we are now quantifying and raise awareness on the fact that what's happening to the glaciers, and although it might be more or less common knowledge, yeah, that glaciers are melting and they shift to earlier times, and it might affect it might interact with the sowing of crops, and so there is a sort of a common understanding that everything relates to each other. But on the other hand, there was no clear at least to my knowledge, a model system that simulates this all and also then confirms those interrelationships, models those interrelationships until you have that. You can also not really quantitatively evaluate the effect of a certain set of adaptation measures. But with the system we build now, we have the impression that we have something that has sufficient quality to and accounts for all those relationships that we think are important now and in the future. For example, on this interaction between what and in spatial relations, that we can now do the analysis of different types of adaptation measures. So that's what actually it's really what we are working on now, and we realize it's late in the project, but we really needed the time to improve the models up to such a level that we feel that all the important processes are actually included. So whether the current adaptation measures are sufficient, I would not know. What we could try to evaluate now is with the selection or a set of measures that are that seem promising. For example, the solar pumped irrigation systems that Dr. Bashir is piloting, and there might be others like the different wheat varieties that work in certain location. What we could do is then try to simulate that in a model system like this, and then apply it on a larger scale and see what the effect is, and then of course interpret the results to the extent well, whether we including the uncertainty and where are we still not sure. But I think what we can do is then use the model at least to get an understanding of the what would be the effect if you would apply those kind of measures or a combination of measures at a larger scale. So that we could do, but I don't have the answer yet. But if you would like to work on that with me, you're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. And in short, I would say that we are working now on strategies as well as adaptation. So, what kind of adaptation, like sprinkler and drip irrigation system? What would be the water saving, and what would be the increase in production if we change from surface water to this high efficient irrigation system? So, we are working on a set of adaptation measures and how they thank you, Esther.
What I think is then really interesting is to combine the things you find on the ground for one location, see if you if the model is able to capture or simulate the same kind of things you see on the ground, and then you can have some trust that you can use a Bayesian scale model to upscale it, and then to see what would be the effect if you apply the same thing that you do in a pilot, apply on a large scale. I think there is also that would be the value of a model, to explore different options and different combinations of options, but never without the very important piloting and field work. But I do think the combination is really interesting, makes it a really interesting tool to test these kind of things.
Yeah, for the house, I would update on piloting. So under this project, there are different set of studies, like the work Hester presented, that was a modeling work we are doing, and she is referring piloting. So we are piloting different type of adaptations in a real life situation at a farmer's field. Like Pakistan Agriculture Research Council, we are piloting different high efficient irrigation systems like drip, sprinkler, integrating with the solar water pumping, and crop diversification, as well as introduction of drought tolerant varieties.
Use
So
of laser technologies as
laser
well.
technologies, and then we will upscale in the modeling, and how would be the water saving as well as production changes in production. So there's one question from Mr. Ali Tokir Sheikh, who is CEO of Lead Pakistan. So he will ask a question online. So over to Sheikh sir. Sheikh sir, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you, sir.
Sir, please. You can ask your question.
The connection is not very good, but you want me to ask question directly, or you want to read it?
You can ask directly. I think we can hear you very properly. Hester, by the time Sheikh Saab is able to ask the question, so there's one more question from the audience.
Yes.
Zishan.
Yes. Hello, Hester. Zishan here. How are you?
Fine. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm fine. Thanks.
Just a little, looking at the other side of what you just explained at the end of your conversation, that you were saying you'd like to see how piloting results actually confirm with the model, which is working at the basin scale. My question is,
I would turn that around, but okay. I think pilots are the guiding here.
yeah,
Pilots
okay.
should confirm the model, but the model should confirm or how do you say it? Confirm the pilot.
Yeah, okay. My question here is that, first of all, how exactly is this model relating water supply and demand at the basin level? And it might be a very, might not relevant to this talk right now, but for the sakes that I want to ask, how good or how robust is this model to apply at a smaller scale, not at the basin level, but to see it at say a sub basin level or at a district level, so that we can have localized scenarios, and then see how local information or the ground information, the ground truthing sits with the results of the model. So how good is to apply at a smaller scale, smaller than the base?
I find that a little bit difficult to answer. You asked me how water supply and demand are exactly modeled at the basin scale. So what I do is, or what I did is, I cut the basin in pieces. Let's say I have a grid scale model. So the grids are 5 minutes in size. That means it's around 8 kilometers by 8 kilometers. And within that grid cell, you have different shares of different types of vegetation. So you have, for example, a fraction of the grid cell that's covered with natural vegetation, and you also have a fraction of the grid cell that's covered with different crops, and either rain-fed or irrigated, with a certain sowing date and a growing period. So on each of these fractions of the grid cell, you have a water balance calculation, So water is coming in either through irrigation or precipitation, or sorry, precipitation only, or precipitation and irrigation, and then of course you have temperature. And for on every plot within this grid cell, the water balance is calculated. Crops are growing, or the natural vegetation is growing, and then you have a sort of an amount of runoff that enters into the river system. The river system is actually an schematized, how do you call that, a representation of the river basin that connects all those grid cells together, and is representing as good as possible the shape of the real river. So it's accumulating the runoff when going downstream over those grid cells, and with a delay in timing, of course, because the water has a certain flow velocity. While going downstream, the water meets lakes, the water meets reservoirs where it's stored and managed, for example, but also the water can be taken out for irrigation. If the model says irrigation is needed. So then from the irrigation perspective, irrigated crop during the growing season that has a soil moisture deficit, it calculates irrigation water demand, and it will look for, if there is an irrigation water demand, it will look for water first in the local cell if there's a river, and then it can take its water from the canal system if it's connected to it. So that's something I impose. I say which grid cells are connected, or from a reservoir, so a large-scale reservoir when it's connected to that. And this whole system works in an dynamic way. So you have a daily time step, and every day there is new runoff generated, going downstream, extracted if needed, and there's some left in the river that goes downstream or is used downstream. Therefore, you have a model that does the spatial interactions. It has a representation of time, but it also is. You're also able to do the upstream downstream links. For example, if you don't have the extractions upstream, your availability downstream is larger. So you have a total conservation of the water balance, and it's all the water is all tracked. So that was the first question on how does the water supply and demand modeling work. But then on the level of detail where it actually makes sense to say something, I find that really difficult, because in the first place the model was set up as a global model, but with all the global data sets getting higher and higher details, you are able to zoom into to a higher resolution. So the original model was running at 5 or 30 minutes, so half degree grid cells, and we increased in this project the resolution to 5 minutes, but still mostly using global data sets. And the question is then, to what level can you zoom in and still say something about the results? I think these models are not developed to say something, for example, at plot level, but and of course, yeah, I mean, also if you look at 5 grid cells, for example, I don't know whether it really makes sense to say something about that grid cell. There might be different soils, you know, within there might be a higher variability in reality than still in the model. I think it's really suitable to show general patterns and general relationships, and maybe do the course planning and show upstream downstream links and that kind of things. But like really going to a really low or a low scale, I would be a little bit more careful. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it's just not designed to really go to low level. Maybe you should use a more detailed model for that, or at least use very much more detailed data.
Yeah.
Thank you, Esther, for your
Can I
response.
make one small comment if you can hear me?
Yes, sir.
We talk about climate change and temperature rise. I'm not a climate change denier, but I'm going to quote a Nobel laureate who said in 2014 that there are 3,800 temperature monitoring stations around the world, and can we measure at a global level 0.1 degree centigrade? That's just, I'm being a little mischievous, but just a thought, something to think about. 0.1 degree you can measure the world temperature? Can't do that. It's a big system. It takes care of itself. It's a closed system. There are, it rolls back. Point one, no. You can't stop point one.
Point.
1.5 की बात कर रहे हैं तो 1.5 1/10 of degree पे हो जाता है ना.
No. She's talking about the special resolution. Okay. Yeah. Another question.
Hi, Hester. So I'm just going to be asking you a couple of questions that Mr. Sheikh was wanted to inquire, and because of I think a technical glitch, he couldn't connect. So I will be doing it on his behalf. I hope you can hear me. So the first question that Mr. Sheikh wanted to ask you was, how has the phasing of rice and wheat been able to coincide with the reduction of meltwater? And if so, what kind of technologies has been used? Were you able to hear me?
Yeah, I was able to hear you, but I'm not sure whether I understand exactly the question. So
if from what has been understood from what you've said, if rice and wheat are being reduced, and this reduction of them being cultivated is coinciding with the reduction of meltwater, then is this true? And if so, then what technologies are being used?
no, that was, I think, what you are referring to is the scenarios for the future, right? So if wheat and rice, the crop models project a decrease in the yields of wheat and rice in the future under climate change. So, that doesn't mean that that exact reduction will actually happen, because there's technological development at the same time. So that's what I heard one of the people say before, that there's new wheat varieties that are already used, that are probably more heat tolerant. So results of those crop models have to be taken with some caution, and this is really based on the current variety, or the variety that's implemented in the model, and then without any changes in management or adaptation in terms of changes in sowing dates or whatsoever. So it's actually not up to me. I don't know if that answers your question. On the glacier melt, it's also something that we have not been looking at in the past, but what we do see in the future, if applying those climate scenarios that we think are representative, that you do see a shift in glacier melt, a peak of about a month, which means that that if there are certain crops that are really depending on that meltwater, that you might anticipate it by also changing sowing dates.
Can I try to ask this question more directly? Thank you very much. It was an excellent presentation. If I understood your central point correctly, the argument is that between 2030 and 2040, there'll be decline in our yield by 20% in wheat and rice, and because of meltwater decline, we'll need to think in terms of alternatives, possibly phasing out from these two. Now, this is a very high percentage, 20, based on the modeling, of course. It will very adversely affect our trade with Europe. And if we understand wheat, it's the main staple. People eat it 3 times a day. It's source of nutrition. So from here, 2 questions emerge in my mind that I wanted to ask from the policy side. It poses a very serious food security challenge and also a technology challenge, alternative cropping challenge. So did your project cover any alternative crops that are less water thirsty that can substitute and help meet the nutrition challenge internally, food security challenge internally, and the international trade challenge of crops on the other? So that's one. And what kind of technologies and R&Ds, if your project has looked at, is a menu for us to look at?
I think this is well, 2 things. The question on whether the project covered looking at different varieties, for example, that is something I should pass on to Dr. Bashir, because he is more involved in the field work and the actual testing of different adaptation strategies. But on the other hand, the reason that I included this figure is actually really not my main message in this presentation. I really wanted to focus on the link between water supply from upstream and water demand downstream. I just want to illustrate that showing results in a certain way, or that if you want to raise awareness, or well, that the way you visualize or show results is very important to bring messages. But it surprises me that some of the figures that I personally really like from my research, for example, are actually not really taken up or do not bring the message across the way I wanted it to do. And I showed that other picture because it was doing, I noticed that it raises a lot of questions, but it also very intuitively says something on the urgency of issues. If you don't show the percentage change by a certain time horizon that's still far away, but you turn it around and you say, okay, if my threshold is a 10% change, when will that be hit? It for some reason it's exactly the same information, but it's perceived in a different way. And that was actually what I wanted to show. But very much with the note that this change in projected change in wheat yield is well, how do I say it? It's really without any a check, or it was really more about how you can visualize things, that I really want to discuss the exact numbers that are in those figures, because I would have to discuss with experts on those numbers exactly. Yeah, so I find it a little bit difficult to say now, okay, we see 20% wheat yield reduction by what was it, 2000, I don't remember exactly what it said, but I find it a little bit difficult to discuss that way. But it does, yes, I think, and that's because of the climate models project most increases in or strongest increase in heat in parts of Pakistan. That's what we have shown in different products in this project as well. So in that sense, yes, I think it's quite straightforward and understandable that also the reduction are strongest in the region where the heat we would take action. But I would ask Dr. Bashir whether there has been tests in this project on wheat varieties, or that's actually not part of this, has not been part of this project.
Yes, Esther, we are doing some work on adaptation. As already I explained that we are working on efficient irrigation systems, solar water pumping integrating with the high efficient irrigation system, introduction of alternate crops like
Okay.
we are working on pulses as well as a few other crops like quinoa, and maybe it's a long-term process. Under this project, we are advocating and sensitizing the different researcher as well as the policymaker regarding the future scenarios in terms of rice or wheat, so they can design their research in those land developing drought tolerant varieties in various crops. But in terms of methods of rice production, so we are working on you might know that India and Pakistan, so we are very fond of and proud of basmati rice, and there's a lot of criticism from the world that it's a big source of methane. So in terms of that is a basically due to its method of sowing as well as production. So PRC in other projects as well as under this project, so we are working on alternate production rice production methods like dry and wet rice production methods. So we are working in those areas, but as well as not directly under this highway project, but in other projects, PRC is working on those lands. But it is again very long-term process because the variety development it takes decades to. But under this project, we are sensitizing, advocating all relevant stakeholders as well as researchers to work on those lines.
Yeah.
Thank you. And there was one more question that was also from Shiksa.
No, so this question, hi. So this question has been sent in from Hasib, who is currently a student at the Washington State University School of Economics, and he wanted to ask you, what would you suggest are the most important adaptation measures that stakeholders in the region should adapt? Also, how do these changes affect non-crop systems like grazing lands or forests?
For this question, I think I also should go to Dr. Bashir, because he is more the person who is interacting with different stakeholders on adaptation measures. What I do see is that well, we have just started with testing, so we were first validating the model and see whether it's able to simulate current water resources, and now we have the feeling it does. We can start evaluating adaptation measures. I into details of this figure that I showed, where but what we did see with irrigation, more so than doing sort of infiltration, increased infiltration measures. That so I think the big gains are in changing irrigation systems. On the other hand, it's a little bit difficult if whether that would not be the incentive to expand the irrigation. So what we currently do is we keep it constant in this test at least, and then irrigation system is changed, for example, to sprinkler or drip, which really saves a lot of water. But the question is whether that would not be used immediately to expand the irrigated area. So there's actually there's some more work needed there to really evaluate. I think it's too early for me, at least, to say that this is the best option. But for water saving, I think irrigation system change can be a very important step. I think that's also confirmed by Dr. Bashir, because they do a lot of tests going in this direction in changing systems and using water saving strategies. But what would be the best option? I think it's too early to tell that, and I would like to hear Dr. Bashir's opinion on that, based on what he does with stakeholders. I'm a little further away from that. Regarding the effects on other land use types, like grazing land or forests, I've really not yet looked into that, but I would assume the effect is not so large, because those areas do not use irrigation water, and they have their own, I would say, their own. That's just my first impression.
Thank you, Esther, once again. So under this project, there has been a lot of very comprehensive and elaborative consultation on prioritization of adaptation option, and in all those consultation with the variety of stakeholders from the public as well as from the private sector and from the farmers. So that was the message in terms of prioritization. Most of the people, they say that adoption of efficient irrigation system like drip and sprinkler, and then there was water storage. I think water storage was the first one. So most of the professional as well as the farmers, so they say that we have a less water storage in the system, that is only 27 days. So there's water availability, and we must enhance the water storages. And like the world in Murray-Darling Basin and Colorado, so they have the water storage and up to 900 days, and we need to enhance the water storage for water increasing demand water availability. And again, the second one was this adaptation of sprinkler and drip irrigations. Although there has been a lot of efforts from the public sector, from the government of Pakistan as well as from international partner, but scale of adoption of this efficient irrigation system, sprinkler and drip, is not so much. There has been a lot of reasons for that one, like our farmers, we are used to irrigate through surface irrigation, and it's very difficult to convince the farmers to adopt, as well as this high cost. Those drip and sprinkler systems are high cost systems, high tech systems, as well as its operation cost, fuel cost is very high. But now from the last 4 or 5 years, there is a solar water pumping integration, and now it's being adopted by many farmers. But we need to be very careful. The solar water pumping, we shouldn't use directly solar water with the surface irrigation. There must be some policy to use the solar water only with the drip and sprinkle irrigation system. So those two technologies were at top. And third one, under highway projects, we are working on crop substitution, and especially this replacement of rice and sugarcane, high delta crops in those areas which are not suitable, like southern Punjab. So these are not the ecologies for rice and sugarcane. So we are working on those. So if we introduce some alternative crops in those areas, so these are three lines we are working. And there are already a few of the government of Pakistan initiatives, like it has been said that laser land leveling, so it can save 20 to 30% in water application. Then there are schemes, very successful schemes, uh, lining of water courses and canals. So set of plan adaptation is already there, but I would say as per my 20-year work as well as many others, so there's a high need to transform this. Instead of surface irrigation, we need to shift on high efficient drip and sprinkler, and we need to enhance our water storage capacity. So with that, thank you.
Well, Bashir, what are the substitute crops?
We are working on pulses. So these are low delta crops, various types of pulses. Then there are many crops, oilseed crops. So in terms of they are low delta crops as well as Pakistan imports and spend a huge bill on import of this oilseed crops. So we are working on those as per government of Pakistan policy as well as PRC policy. So we are working on pulses as well as oilseed crops. And one more crop, as I said, under highway in our pilot sets, we are working on quinoa and two or three other crops. My team and other team are working. I don't know exact the names of those crops, so we are working on those lines.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have one more question from a journalist in Pakistan, Afia Salam. She wanted to ask you, what is your opinion about laser leveling that's been mentioned during our conversation today, especially with respect to topsoil nutrients which are lost, and some people are fearful of their loss. What would you have to say about that?
I'm sorry, I just missed the question. What's
Yeah.
my opinion on
Laser leveling.
what?
Laser
Sorry,
leveling.
on what?
Yeah, Hester,
I don't know what that.
in Pakistan, in surface irrigation, so most of our field are unleveled. So there's a government scheme, so they are providing laser land leveling to precisely level their field. So the question was that with this laser land leveling, there is a disturbance on topsoil nutrients. So do you agree with this argument?
So what is the argument that it would lead to less water use, or
No. Soil, topsoil fertility.
topsoil? Well, to be honest,
Yeah, I think you
I
are
think
the
I
person for that one.
I don't know enough about it, and I don't know. I mean, I can imagine if you do laser leveling and that makes water distribution more efficient. I can imagine that, but I don't know if it's used for that. But it's to be honest, I had not heard about it before, so I don't know. And about the soil fertility
Yeah.
and changes in that, I'm also not 100% sure.
Okay, Dr. Hester, and same. I was asked, but being this is not my field, and I cannot respond on this question because I'm an irrigation specialist, and I don't know about this one. But maybe we can confirm from the
I would like to specifically add that it is a proven technology, laser land leveling. It is now being widely used in Pakistan, especially at the larger farms and also now at the smaller level. So it conserves water from 20 to 30% per acre at the rate of per acre. So it is a very useful technology, and it is one of the adaptation measures to reduce the impacts of climate change on water.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, yeah, I think there's no more question, and with that, we can conclude. Hester, I think it has been a very informative, very nice presentation, and it was very relevant to Indus Basin, as we all know that Indus Basin we are facing water scarcity, and then again, as it drives most of its water for irrigation from a glacier and snow melt, and due to this climate change, there there's high vulnerability impacting water demand as well as supply due to climate change, and you covered all those aspects, and I think it was nice for the audience. They were updated, and thank you sparing your time, and I heard that you are facing a problem in your throat, especially. So thank you very much. And I would thank the audience. They came and very actively participate, and they heard your presentation with a key in interest, and had a lot of comment and questions. So it's a Ramadan here, and it is very hot summer days, and I thank you for all the participants. So they came here with the fasting and hard days. Thank you, you as well as for all the participants. And I really thank and Lead Pakistan taking this initiative, and I thank Lead Pakistan for providing you the opportunity as well as for providing us the opportunity to and deliberate on this very important I think aspect of climate change, as well as water supply and demand, which is maybe affecting our food security. So with that, thank you, Esther, and thank you all for your participation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. And I just realized I forgot to put my email address in the presentation. If you have any further questions, please feel free to contact me, or any more clarifications, or any comments, or critics, or things I should, well, anyway, or options for collaborations. I'm also really looking forward to that. But then please ask Dr. Bashir for my email address, or just Google me. You'll find my email address at Wageningen University. But yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's a pity that I cannot see you all, that the screen video didn't work. But well, okay, thank you very much, and have a nice rest of the day.
Okay, thank you, Esther. Thank you very much.
Yeah.